can you help me understand the Buddhist concept of emptiness? Emptiness, or shunyata, sunata in Pali, is one of the fundamental topics of Buddhism. Jai Prabhuji, we mentioned the Buddha and his journey in one or some of our classes. A journey that started at the point of leaving the palace, his family, newborn child, a beautiful wife, a glorious future, a lot of responsibility, a lot of enjoyment, abundance of apparent freedom, material freedom, a lot of choices, into an attempt to discover some truth that is more substantial, that is more fundamental of all that this world can offer, and that is free of suffering, that the Buddha recognized so all-pervading in this world. This journey was not easy. Again, the Buddha left behind everything we have mentioned into a complete unknown, complete insecurity, poverty, austerity, loneliness, without answers, only out of desire to discover, and for sure such a strong and dramatic action must have come from some inner knowing that there is somewhere water. The Buddha did not have an easy path or a short path or a fast path, but he did manage to penetrate through the ocean of illusion into discovery, what he called awakening, that happened to him after a lot of trials and failures, unsuccessful attempts, and a question that were not easily answered, but they did yield the aspiration that he originally had, which is to discover some truth that is worth living and even telling others, as the Buddha did. The Buddha shared a lot of wisdom. He taught disciples. He left the humanity with much more wisdom that we had before the Buddha walked on this planet, that we find in various Buddhist scriptures that, of course, came from disciples of the Buddha in different times, and that enrich us as humanity tremendously, and till today, thousands of years after the Buddha left this planet, enrich us and benefit us and inspire us, so many individuals in different paths, in different places, in different ways, and in different journeys. This wisdom is still accessible to us. The conclusion of what the Buddha discovered, if we want to try and put it in words, which is a difficult attempt because the Buddha spoke about truth that is that can only be penetrated through direct seeing, as he himself experienced, discovered, he saw it. He didn't share the wisdom that he heard from someone else, but that he himself discovered out of meditation. But if we want to put it in words, I believe it would be one word, and is emptiness or shunyata. And in today's class, or in this article that we will analyze in 3 different classes, today's first out of 3, Prabhuji attempts to direct us to the seeing of the Buddha that is summarized in this one word, shunyata, or emptiness. This is the conclusion, we can say, of Buddhism. It's the fundamental view or ontological truth of Buddhism. So we spoke about the term, what is Siddhanta. Different schools of thought, different religions, different philosophies have a conclusion or a view of reality or ontological truth that describes their view. What is the view of reality? We learn when we start to delve into philosophies and religions, we understand that the way that we typically perceive the world is not necessarily the only way to perceive the world. There are other ways, and one of them, for example, very important and not only existing in Buddhism, but also in other schools of thought, is that this reality is empty of any existence of entities. So the world as we see it does not exist. The world as we see it is empty, and every entity that we can perceive is empty of existence. This is what the Buddha tells us, that we can understand from Prabhuji's word. Everything that we can hear, see, smell, think of, and even touch, okay? Even this entity, it's empty. This is what the Buddha tells us. It's empty of existence. In essence, it does not exist. Mysterious theory, but we will try to understand it through Prabhuji's exploration in this article. How come? So if we look at Buddhism as different paths, we will see a lot of principles, a lot of wisdom. As we said, there are various scriptures and principles, including the importance of the principle of cause and effect. Our actions do matter and have consequences, including a path that is consisting of 8 limbs, that it's part of the Four Noble Truths, which means very fundamental in Buddhism. They don't only include the harmonious view or the right view of reality, which is the sādhanā, to see the reality as the Buddha saw it. According to Buddhism, this will be the right view, but it includes many other aspects, such as harmonious speech, harmonious action, harmonious livelihood, meditation, concentration, effort, etc. But the basic principle that is fundamental is the sādhanā. In other words, all this wisdom of Buddhism, if disconnected from the core understanding of the view that everything is empty of existence, we lose the right context and will not be in line with the Buddha's wisdom. So in every school of thought, we have mythology and symbology and path and regulations, laws, mitzvot, etc. Different schools have different fountain of guidances and wisdom. But there is some ultimate view of reality that is fundamental, because it will determine the logic of the path that we are walking. So it's the basis, it's the origin, and it's also the conclusion. We want to get to the same realization of the Buddha if we follow his footsteps. So again, sādhanā is significant. For example, we spoke about the school of Advaita Vedanta that is very similar in essence, in its ontological truth, to Buddhism and to Prabhuji's view of reality. Advaita Vedanta will tell us, Brahman Satyam, Jagad Mithya, Jiva Brahmaiva Paraha, which means everything is Brahman. This word, the only truth, the only reality is Brahman. Brahman is of course a name, and Brahman is not the name Brahman, but it speaks about some one nature that exists in essence, that is the only reality, and world as we see it is illusory, as we perceive it. The world of division, of separation does not exist, and there is no difference between souls and Brahman, Jiva Brahmaiva Naparaha, which means we as well are this Brahman, this one nature. This in essence is very similar to Buddhism that tells us this world of entities does not exist in essence. This separation does not exist in essence. It does not have ultimate reality. Neither Buddhism nor Advaita Vedanta, neither Prabhuji tell us that this pen is our imagination, or that we dream it, or that we are crazy. Of course there is a pen here. I'm touching it. I'm seeing it. I'm using it. However, they tell us this is not the ultimate reality. It's temporary. It will not last forever. It wasn't always existing. It's temporary, and it's a perception. It's a name. I call it a pen because I want to communicate with you, and both you and I understand what I mean when I say it. Both you and I recognize this entity as a pen. But in fact, this is just a combination of materials that can be used for a certain purpose, that we give it some name so we can communicate. But there is no pen in essence. It's our idea. It's our creation, mental creation. Similarly, all this world of names and forms are mental creations, mental entities. And in essence, Prabhuji will tell us that Prabhuji's vision again agrees with the view of Buddhism and with the view of Advaita Vedanta and with the view of many other paths that essentially tell us the same thing. This division is temporary in its egoic perception of the reality, but in essence, ultimately, everything is divinity. Prabhuji will tell us that every entity that we can either perceive through the senses, which means physical entity, or that we can use in our vocabulary, which means verbal entity, or that we can think of, which means mental entity. Think of, it can be a dream or imagination, aspiration, past, future, so many types of mental entities we use. All these entities are in essence consciousness. Everything in this world, every division, every entity again can be broken down to consciousness. So its real ultimate reality is consciousness. Prabhuji will tell us that consciousness is not only the only object, which means all these objects can be broken down, as the Buddha tells us, and to nothingness, to consciousness, or to Brahman. It can have again different name, or to divinity. But that consciousness is also the only subject that can perceive anything, because consciousness is knowing. We cannot know anything if there is no consciousness. So consciousness is the only subject, quote unquote. Consciousness is the only object, quote unquote. We said quote unquote because there is no subject and no object in essence, because if consciousness knows consciousness, which means consciousness knows itself, as Prabhuji tells us in many places, it means the only consciousness is. So in essence, this is the Siddhanta, as I understand it, of the retroprogressive path. Consciousness alone exists. Again, agrees with Buddhism, Advaita Vedanta, and every school that will tell us that the reality is just oneness, one nature, that there is no division and no separation. And in essence, there is no difference between us. These are just temporary manifestations of this one consciousness. So all these siddhantas, conclusions that we mentioned, came from direct seeing of reality, of individuals that saw directly, such as Shankaracharya, such as Gautama Siddhartha, such as many other individuals, such as Prabhuji. They speak to us from what they see, they experience. It's not just ideas that they developed along the years. But in addition, the path also includes intellectual means that help us to understand these conclusions, the logic in this conclusion, even though we are not experiencing it currently. We experience a divided reality, but the intellectual means help us to disassemble slowly, gradually, our current siddhanta, which is division, which is separation, which is our existence as an entity. By understanding better and better, by working through this path that they paved for us, we slowly are able to weaken our current siddhantas. So as we said, we also have a siddhanta. It's not that we have no view of reality. We might not even realize that we have some view of reality until we start to see that there are other views. So our view of reality typically is that we exist as individuals, is that the world is everything that is from this skin outward. We call it the world. That we were born at a certain day, time, that we will die in another point in time, that we have different family members and ties, very intimate, beautiful connections, etc., etc. We have a dog and a cat, profession, future, past, garden, car, right? This is all our world, organized. And what we learn when we come in touch with other Siddhantas is that this may not be the only reality. This may not be the conclusion. It might be temporary reality, temporary perception, which is, of course, revolutionary if it's the first time or second time that we come across this different views of reality. If we are more familiar, if we heard already and we know this truth, it will be more digestible to us. And but still, it doesn't mean that we experience it, that we can testify about it. We still have the journey. So the spiritual journey, in fact, is the shift from the previous Siddhanta, old Siddhanta, to the establishment in the view of reality that everything is one nature and that division does not exist in essence, but it's a mental projection. This is the spiritual journey. Sometimes we are more inclined to our past Siddhanta, we feel more separated, more ego, more important, etc. Sometimes we have more glimpses that we can recognize it really. This is just a game. We are, in essence, so similar. We are, in essence, spirit. When we feel the call, right? When in Christianity they say, Jesus calls me. When we feel this desire to pray, to go to the mosque or to the church or to meditate or to read any scripture, etc., maybe just to detach from the world and go to the forest a little bit away from all this noise. Maybe we are even not religious people in the common understanding of the word religious. Still, all these desires in us to detach from this world, temporary existence, concrete existence, testifies that we all know that there is some truth that is transcendental to our current temporary existence. The Buddha tells us this emptiness is the nature of all of us, not only of the ones who awakened. Prabhuji tells us consciousness is the reality of each and every individual. It means it's not Prabhuji's new message to humanity that it's totally new to us and that we need to adapt some new idea if we want to understand Prabhuji. Not at all. He tells us this is the reality of all of us, which means we have direct access to consciousness. We don't need Prabhuji in order to recognize consciousness in us. But the specific conversation or journey that each of us will have with this familiarity, with consciousness within him, or Brahman within him, or God within him, or emptiness, however I want to call this inexplicable space in us, will be individual journey. The West understands emptiness as absence or a lack of something. On the other hand, the East sees it as presence or the existence of space and silence. So here Prabhuji tells us that there are different views on the understanding of this principle of emptiness between the East and the West. And this, I feel, Prabhuji gives us a hint to start and go deeper into the understanding. Today we are reading just the very beginning of this article, and again we will continue also in the next two classes to deepen together with Prabhuji in the understanding of the emptiness. So he starts by giving us this hint. And I think that this point, that there is difference in how we perceive emptiness in the West and in the East, is a key. Prabhuji tells us, in the West, for us, emptiness is just nothing. It's not interesting. It's a void. Perhaps it's nothing to even talk about or to relate to it. But the East understands that when we speak about emptiness, we speak about presence, not absence, not lack, power, beauty, strength. In the East, we can recognize there are many arts, including martial arts, which is the art of fighting, of beating one another. It gets its power from the emptiness. So the East recognizes the power and the beauty of this space that, as we said, we all have access to, and give it importance. The East understands more the importance of the quiet, of the detachment, of the perhaps modesty, austerity, to diminish ourselves, not in order to, not because we take ourselves less seriously or want less to enjoy, but because we understand that the abundance, material abundance, a lot of ties, a lot of desires, a lot of achievements, a lot of titles, a lot of thoughts, is not strength, but it weakens us. The more we want, we are more tied to the world. We're more in bondage. So this basic understanding exists much more naturally in the East. And in the West, it might take us a little longer journey to even understand this concept, because we are less familiar with it. We didn't grow up with it. And I think this is a great understanding for us Westerners to start and contemplate on, and perhaps walk deeper with Prabhuji into the understanding of this emptiness. So the Buddha told us everything is empty of existence. And what Prabhuji tells us, it does not mean that there is nothing positive under this truth. The Buddha didn't only speak about what is not, but by revealing what is not, he revealed to us an important presence on which he perhaps does not speak. But Prabhuji points us to the fact that the Buddha in fact spoke about some presence, not about inexistence, but about existence, but not the existence that we perceive through the mind, but much more fundamental and deeper existence, that is our existence. We all know that we exist, but this existence still remains, even though we can remove so many things that currently we attribute to ourselves, which is what Prabhuji tells us in so many ways and through so many paths and intellectual explanations. And I believe that only when we start to try to develop this mastery, try to meditate, try to work on our ego, be a little less achievers, a little less controllers, we see that it's not easy, that we are so used to being the controller and the achiever and to attribute importance to this personality and to detach all the ties. In most cases, it's going to be a journey. It will not be a transition of 1 or 2 days, because we are tied to this personality. We are attached to this perception of reality. And to break down all this attachment, again, it's usually a process that we can walk in through different ways and religions and practices, but essentially, and I believe this is what the retroprogressive path will say, we allow more and more consciousness in our lives. And the more there is consciousness, we are more detached from the false identification with this entity. We are more in reality. By being more established in this consciousness or in this emptiness, as the Buddha perhaps will call it, it does not mean that we are more idle, or that we are lazy, doing less, or that we are indifferent, but that we are less identified. So the point here is not an attempt to be empty, but to detach from the false identification. The fact that we have in this world a personality, or that we are some personality, we have some name and form, profession, path that we walk, etc. Each individual has his own particular personality that he nourishes or builds or cultivates. This is unavoidable. We are living in this world of names and forms. But what causes us the bondage and does not allow consciousness is the attachment to this personality and the identification, is that we think that this is us. Prabhuji tells us, no, the emptiness is us. The personality is what comes and goes. And our power comes not from the personality, not from the success of this personality, but from the emptiness. And the emptiness can live in us the more we are detached from the false identification. The spiritual aspirant wants to allow more and more room in their lives to the emptiness. Again, the personality is in order to serve the consciousness or the emptiness or the divine, whatever you want to call it. But it's not of the utmost significance of our existence in this universe. Our egos, or we egos, want to use the space for our enrichment, right? We want to be enlightened because then we can impress other people. So we wanted to be rich, famous, beautiful, smart. Now we also want to be enlightened. We want to use this space. We want to have a resume of mystical experiences so we can impress others. Spiritual aspirant wants just the opposite. He wants that the personality will serve the empty space. And this is, of course, it's a fundamental difference. What really leads our life? What do we really want? And again, I believe that someone who is like the Buddha, like Prabhuji, like Shankaracharya, like Lord Chaitanya, desires truth, will give more importance to this inner call within him than to the beauty or success of the personality. This is the difference, or this is the direction of the spirit, what we call a spiritual aspirant. And Prabhuji gives us here such a vivid example to illustrate the point that the emptiness is really the fundamental and most significant element, we can say, in this world. It's hard to find the right name because we speak about something so subtle that any word will be a mistake without a doubt, but the fundamental reality, the fundamental existence, more real than the entities that we can see and interact with. And before we read Prabhuji's example, let's try to use it in order to try and understand what does it tell us. So imagine your room. Try to picture your room. And now think about the room of your best friend. Picture it. Try to even describe it to yourself. Try to think about the room of your childhood, and the office and the kitchen, okay? Just a few examples of rooms. The way you perceive the rooms, if you didn't read Prabhuji's following words, is actually not the room. It's not your rooms. It's not the room of your friend, and it's not the kitchen, it's not the office. These are items that are currently occupying this space that we call our room, or their room. We can take out all these items, it will still remain this room. What is really the room? The room is even not the walls. Empty room, the walls are not the room. Because in the walls we cannot exist. In the room we want to exist. We want to eat and sleep and sit and talk. We need room to be. Prabhuji tells us the room is actually everything that is in between the items that we mentioned. It's where there is no carpet, no bed, no ceiling, no desk, etc. This is the room. We can be there. In essence, if we think about it, the rooms are similar. All rooms are similar, regardless if they are small or big or fancy or simple, or in this country and another country. It's just air that we can be in. This is the room, the real room. In fact, in addition to it, the bed can be inside this space because there is room. If there was no room, there could not be bed inside, and no carpet, and we could not be there. So the emptiness, the space, is what allows the existence of everything else. And In this example, we speak about air, but more essentially, we do not speak about air. We speak about more fundamental emptiness that allows even air to be, and everything else, that is the space that allows all existence. This is the most fundamental reality, Prabhuji tells us. This emptiness that cannot be explained. It's not an element, it's not air, it's not ether. It's not a word, because it's more fundamental to our even existence. But this is the ultimate reality that we can only experience, again, we cannot explain, but that it's empty of everything. Everything that we can name, every entity, every idea. So let's read Prabhuji's words about this example. When we visualize a room, we think of its structure, walls, doors, windows, and ceiling, but not of its interior space, without which the room is uninhabitable. Similarly, when we look at a painting, we pay attention to the shapes, but not to the emptiness of the background, although its absence would make the shapes indiscernible. So we started our journey into the understanding of the idea of emptiness, understanding of the core of Buddhism, we can say of the vision of the Buddha. We'll continue this journey in 2 more classes, as we said previously. And we will end today's class with some words of Prabhuji from a lecture that he gave regarding the topic of Buddhism and of emptiness that is very linked to what we spoke in this class. Here, emptiness does not imply lack or non-existence, but rather a fundamental fullness that encompasses and dissolves all dualities, such as subject and object, spiritual and material, being and non-being. The realization of emptiness dispels the illusory limits imposed by the rational and discursive mind. In the non-fragmented vision of existence, the perception of distances and differences that structure everyday experience dissolves, allowing access to a non-dual consciousness. Jai Prabhuji.